What's up? I'm Delaney Fisher, and welcome to your Self-Helpless snack. This mini episode is just a little taste of the Self-Helpless podcast. So if you want to dive deeper into the topic, you can find the full conversation linked in this episode's description. What is the definition of gaslighting? What is it? And then some examples of what it might look like in different relationships.
Sure. So it's a form of emotional abuse. So again, it's one of those forms of abuse that there are studies showing that emotional abuse can cause even more damage than physical abuse. Long term psychologically, and again, it's something that you don't see when you're with them one on one. Is when they're abusive. Like they can be very selective about who they display the abuse to, or the abusive behavior. So gaslighting is where you are telling people that they're crazy, that you are telling people that other people think they're crazy. You're lying to them, just blatantly lying to them, projecting, meaning that you blame other people. Like, for instance, a lot of gaslighters are chronic cheaters. And so they will accuse the victim of cheating. And they'll say, you came home 5 minutes late from work. You're sleeping with so-and-so at work, or looking through their phone, when in fact it's the gaslighter that's cheating. So they'll really put their stuff on someone else. They use what I call invisible armies. And that's where they say, well, everybody thinks you're crazy. And they speak a lot in absolutes, like everybody, no one will believe you. Everybody thinks you're crazy, that kind of thing. They also will pitch you against people. So they'll say, oh, well, your sister said that you're crazy. And then you get upset with your sister instead of going directly to your sister and going, hey, did you say this thing? Because at that point, you're relying on the gaslighter for their version of reality. So you're going to believe them over your sister, even though your sister has been in your life forever and you're really close with her. You start taking the gaslighter's opinion over people that you love and care about. In the workplace, this is a coworker that will take items from you and then claim that they never did it, that you're just disorganized and useless, and that's why your items are disappearing. They'll tell you a certain project due date, and then they tell you the wrong date and then blame you for not getting it completed and embarrass you in front of people. They'll tell you that other people in the office think you're crazy. A boss will give you the wrong project and will do that on purpose to sabotage you. They will try to get you alone to harass you. And when you try to not be around them, they'll say, well, why are you trying to avoid me? You say, well, I feel really uncomfortable. And they say, well, you have no reason to think that. You're always so dramatic or so sensitive. And in the workplace, you have somebody in a position of power that's gaslighting you. That's tricky too, because you go, well, I've got this job that I've worked for my whole life. I have this job. What if I leave? Am I going to find another job? And so there's a pressure there in the workplace that really causes people to stay in those situations.
What are the short-term and long-term psychological effects of somebody who's been gaslit or is currently being gaslit?
Well, short-term, you get a feeling of just helplessness, and that can turn to long-term chronic stress. So the short-term feeling is, I can't do anything right. This person is in the right. I'm in the wrong. My whole life has kind of been a lie. And you start to distrust other people. You start isolating yourself from people. And that's exactly what the gaslighter wants. They want you to separate yourself from people that could say, hey, something's not right with your relationship, or something's not right with this friendship or at work. And then long term, it looks like low self-esteem. It can cause increase in suicidal behavior even, especially because the gaslighter wants you to be their only source, called narcissistic supply. They want to get all the attention from you, but it's never good enough. Or they find out over time that this person didn't just cheat once, they've cheated 10, 12, 14, 15 times. And that, again, that idea of that rug being pulled out from under you can cause you to really go into a tailspin. Sometimes their identity's been broken down into, they don't even know what their likes or dislikes are anymore. Much more of a challenge to heal from that type of breakup than in another relationship that's healthier.
What is the difference between spotting somebody who might potentially gaslight you eventually and a genuine, exciting connection with somebody where maybe you truly haven't felt like that before with someone?
The grand gesture stuff, I immediately go, oh, you're in trouble, run, instead of just appreciating, oh, it's a grand gesture. So grand gestures, first of all, that's something that's a real red flag. I think of so I do a Gilmore Girls podcast. There's this episode where the fiance, they got into some argument or something. And so he has 1,000 flowers delivered to her at work. And I'm like, okay, that's really inappropriate. That's my feeling, right? And I know a lot of people are like, ooh, that's so romantic. I'm like, no. That's not healthy, because first allergies, that was my first love, allergies. And then also Then he's delivered to her work and it's 1,000 flowers. Like that's not okay. That's weird, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh my God.
but in movies and TV, we go, oh, that's so wonderful. No, that's not wonderful. What's wonderful is someone that treats you well along your relationship. That doesn't mean you don't have arguments. You discuss stuff and you work it out. You don't resort to grand gestures to make up for your crappy behavior, so because that's the cycle of abuse. It's the building up of tension, then there's an explosion, and then there's remorse and grand gestures, and you go back through the cycle again. When you're on a date, the difference between someone that you connect with and someone that's love bombing you, when someone's love bombing you, they're asking you sometimes very personal questions, right? I've never felt this way. If you feel that way, usually don't say it out loud. If you get a dopamine boost when you meet somebody you really connect with, but this is someone that's going above and beyond, that they are already talking about commitment in the first date, or they are talking about moving in together on the first date. And they shower you with gifts. And again, when it's a healthy relationship, you can connect with somebody, but there's a slower buildup. Mm-hmm. Not all the time, but usually there's a slower buildup. But grand gestures you've got to watch for, right? There's no difference bringing flowers to someone and then bring 1,000 flowers with you to the workplace like the show. So you really have to look for how intense is it, and how unrealistic is it too. That how can you really meet somebody for the first time and say this is the best day I've ever been on, and it's only 15 minutes in. I've never felt this way about anybody. Yeah, run. But I can see the other side was that people think, oh, well, it's going to be boring if I don't have that spark. But sometimes that spark builds too. And that's something we need to think about, that sometimes the best relationships are ones that build up over time. People need to earn our vulnerability. It feels really good to have someone's attention, but we need to look at, is it too much? I think that's really a gut feeling. If you haven't had somebody love bomb you, it can feel just like, wow, they really, really like me. This is great. But again, look at the pattern of people. If you haven't been exposed to this before, look at the pattern of people that you've been in relationships with in the past. How did that form? And the healthy one, again, is a slow ramp up. That doesn't mean there's not chemistry and there's not sparks, but it's not a push towards pressuring you for a relationship right away. So it's a little bit different. A lot of that, I can just say it's intuition. If something doesn't feel right, it's not. And again, look at, what is it with your ego being kind of filled by that attention, and what is actual connection? Because there's a lot of pushing without an actual emotional connection going on. It feels good for us to, have somebody that likes us. But again, it's a performative kind of liking. It's not a real thing. And it's cognitive empathy. This is somebody that will talk about themselves the whole time. But when they ask you how you're doing or how your day's been, they don't really care. It's more like they know they have to ask that because that's socially what you do, but they don't really listen to the answer.
Is everyone susceptible to gaslighting, or is there a certain person or personality type that is more likely to be gaslit?
Everyone is susceptible. Even if you've had completely healthy relationships up to this point, you're susceptible. Yep, absolutely. I think there are people that are more vulnerable. I think if you're going through anxiety, depression, grief, or have ADHD, I think that there are times where you feel more vulnerable. I think points where we feel more like a raw nerve. And that's where sociopaths, gaslighters will zero in on you. Especially if you're doing online dating, your profile says anything that makes you feel like you've been vulnerable, or sometimes people will write like, I'm looking for a good person. I've had, issues with the past with people not treating me right. A gaslighter will zero in on that because they feel like you will be more open to their range of crappy behavior.
So glad you tuned into Self-Helpless. If you felt supported by this or past episodes, there are a couple ways you can help the show. Feel free to share it with a friend who may enjoy the variety of discussions we have here. Also, you can become a monthly or annual supporter of the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/selfhelpless. That's where you can pitch and vote on topics, submit questions for special guests, or be a silent supporter and not participate in any of that. 100% of Patreon and merch proceeds go directly to operating expenses that not only keep the show going through thick and thin, but also keeps it accessible to all with minimal ads. If you want to show a little extra lovin', you can leave an Apple Podcast review or send an email to share how Self-Helpless has impacted you. All of this info and more goodies can be found at selfhelplesspodcast.com. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.